Welcome to the Retail Tech Podcast, where we talk about the full spectrum of technologies and implementation used in omnichannel and online retail. Make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at retailtechpodcast.com, and we always look forward to your feedback. To the grocery, drugstore, and convenience business. How are you today, Randy?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. So, as you mentioned to me earlier, the grocery and drugstore business is a tiny business which is only $1.4 trillion in the US. I was really interested to learn more about how you're seeing technology change the lives of the grocery store and the drugstores and things like that. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about that and then go into how SAP is actually helping.
Sure. So I'd say the biggest change in the last 10 years is the consumer is showing up, whether it's an online visit or a mobile visit or walking in the front door, with more technology in their hand than ever before. They have more access to information. They have an expectation of interaction that has never existed before. So that fact is now permeating through all of the business processes at a grocer. So store operations, supply chain, merchandising, financials, HR, all those kind of back office business processes have seen that fact impact the way they think and how they react to the consumer. That's changed a lot.
How is that received by the C-suite, and how are most people reacting to it or addressing it?
So the reaction is really relative to the vision and strategy at the C level. And if you look at the C level in most traditional grocers, that role is an individual that came up, was a store manager, was a regional director, was a category manager, worked their way to the top of the company. And their context is store operations. It's not technology. It's not, that's not the first thing that they think about. How can I facilitate my business process with better underlying technology? They think about, what do I got to do at my store to facilitate a better conversation with my customer? And it's foreign. It's a different message. And the first reaction is not, got to go solve it with analysis. It's, honestly, I don't know what to do with it, because I don't think that way.
So I think that's a very interesting and good way to put it, is that they're focused on operations, and probably historically the only connection they had to the consumer in the past was advertising. Consumer is going to come to the store, and then from there on, this is where I do things. And that model, the interaction with the consumer, is the major shift right now.
Right. Well, that ad, that flyer, that whatever it was, was either an email blast, or it was a piece of paper in a newspaper, but it was never personalized at all. And so their expectation is that when the consumer finally shows up at the store, their customer service strategy is to hand that to the store manager, to the department managers, to the associates in the store. That is the way that they satisfy customers, instead of what's available to them today, which is a whole plethora of ways to interact and to constantly be in contact with the shopper, instead of waiting for them to show up at the check stand in a store.
Right. So what is SAP's approach when you talk to retailers? Where do you start?
It's a difficult. There's really nowhere to. We start here every time. It really depends on the context of what the customer wants to talk about. If we're SAP, so we're really good at the infrastructure. We were good at that, but we're so much more than that today. So it really is. Honestly, my job, my role, is to show up and talk about the art of the possible. What could tomorrow look like? I always like to lead with, what if 90% of your orders 10 years from now arrive digitally before the shopper hits the door of your store, right? That's when, and that's nobody argues with me when I say that, because they believe that's a potential fact.
But you probably want to pull that forward a little bit, say, and not say 9 years or 10 years from now, 3 years from now.
I use 10 years so that it can be, they get
more digestible.
Yeah, because if I say 3 years, then like I'll forget it. Don't want to talk anymore. But the point is, if it's 10 years, there's a roadmap, that a journey to get to that capability, to use that information to really connect with the shopper, right? But if it's a long time, but they can do it. It's feasible. But then we stop, and then we go back to, okay, what do you got to do? What's the first thing you have to do? And you have to identify the places where that digitization, right? It's a buzzword and everybody uses it, but it really means everything's in the system. Whether it's a forecast, or it's a master data element, or it's a personalized offer to a shopper, or it's analytics that help you predict what the shopper wants tomorrow. Those are all things that happen, but they can't happen in Excel, or in some piece of paper, or in a newspaper ad,
or in a report somewhere on a clipboard.
Exactly. You can't run a report and digest it and then take action. You have to digitize it so that you're going from analytics or insights to action, in the same process, same step, and that delivers. So tomorrow, I can make all kinds of predictions, right? But if you think about the iPhone, right, today it is way more than I expected it to be 10 years ago when it came out. 10 years ago, if I would have predicted anything in 2007, I would have shortchanged it, because it is way better than I ever imagined it to be. So you got to say that to yourself. I can imagine 10 years, but I'm coming up 5 years short, most likely.
Right.
But when you build that digital infrastructure and you use that becomes the mindset. Then when things change, you can change with them. It's not disruptive to change. Today, that CEO looks at his infrastructure. Well, he never looks at his infrastructure, but he says, I need this.
Right.
And the CIO looks at his infrastructure and goes, I can't do it.
What exactly is the infrastructure, different pieces of the infrastructure that they need to be digitizing?
Well, in SAP world, we think end to end, right? Okay. We don't chunk it up when it comes to the platform. That's really the message, right? We've developed a platform that can manage all of the business processes, from customer relations and personalized offers, to store operations, to warehouse inventory, to purchasing and relationships with supplier, to managing costs, to managing retail, optimizing promotions. All of those business processes all fit on top of this, what we call the HANA platform. And that gives us real-time access to information. It gives us a platform that lets all of the processes plugged in to it to gain access to it immediately and to make decisions. So we move from reporting and transactions to insights and action built on that platform.
What is HANA?
HANA is an in-memory platform. So we've gone from your traditional row and columns database, where there are conjoined in sections, and to get that information out of that type of database, it takes a ton of processing. In fact, it's so much processing that what you have to do is aggregation. So you add things up and look at the aggregation, not at the individual details. With HANA, it's an in-memory platform, so we no longer have rows and columns.
So it's basically no SQL. Is that how you can describe it as well?
Describe it that way. We don't ever aggregate.
Okay.
We act on the very bottom of the data, and we don't batch process. So we're instantly accessing the information and instantly transacting against it. That's really the differentiator. It's analytics and insights and transactions all in the same place.
What does it take for somebody that is running their business on all these tables and relational databases to change to this platform, that's probably not as small. Is it how easy is it?
We obviously, because we're moved to this, we got to be able to do that.
Right.
So part of the implementation strategy is to take your existing data structures and move and transform them into the columnar databases that we're using inside of HANA.
That's one of the key innovations that's happening in software right now,
Right.
is the change of the database.
Yes.
The fundamental change of the database.
Right.
So not just another relational database.
No.
Right.
And that lets me interact with my shopper in real time.
Right.
I don't have to wait for the data to be aggregate and to put into a cube and then reported against. I have access to the transaction instantly. So when she shows up in the store, I immediately know she's there if she's allowed, some permissions. But my associates know she's there. They can interact with her.
Okay.
They can, if there's an out of stock, she can send a message to the selector.
Transition to HANA is a more fundamental transition for the retailer, and the abilities that it actually gives the retailer is to have immediate access
Right.
to the data, right?
Right. That, and there's so many more things we can do. Like we've created a unified demand forecast inside of our business applications, and that's the forecast. There's not a bunch of other ones in other applications. That unified demand forecast is embedded in the database. So when I need a forecast for my replenishment, for my assortment planning, for my promotional planning, for my pricing structures and strategies, I access the same forecast. I don't go put an algorithm in every single application and then hope they kind of sort of come up with the right answer.
Right.
I have one answer, and I permeate the rest of the applications.
Okay.
That's just one example. That context is all over the place. In
Right.
supply chain, in store operations, in merchandising, you've got such a different view of life because you're looking at real-time transactional data instead of aggregations.
One other topic that I've been covering lately, which I think is probably close to you, is the Amazon Go store. It's a very interesting development, and I think it's, I actually applaud Amazon for pushing the boundaries and the envelope.
Right.
Because ultimately, if we listen and we look and we learn, we can actually all become better for the consumer.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it was, so I got to say this story. I was in an executive meeting at a grocer, and when that Amazon video came out, and there were 3 individuals in that meeting that had e-com accountabilities, and all 3 of them got texts from their boss, and all 3 of them left the meeting to go for another meeting, an ad hoc,
Right.
called meeting.
Emergency
Yeah.
session.
So first of all, the concept is off the charts. It is spectacular. There's a few flaws that I immediately, in my experience of running a grocery store, I had never one time had a customer take a product off a shelf and put it back on the shelf where it came from.
Right.
They don't do that. They put it back in the meat department.
Right.
Or they drop it at the check stand.
Right.
Or they put it somewhere else. So that's got a little bit of a flaw in it. When you got 60,000 SKUs in the store,
Something to work out.
there's some stuff to do.
Right.
But regardless of that,
Right.
the concept that the consumer will give you permission to talk to them in real time and to transact with them in real time, it's not fantasy. It's not something IT people thought up or people like SAP to sell software. It's happening.
Right.
And Amazon, I like to say Amazon is a technology company that's decided to sell stuff for a living. And
That's true. It's true.
they are not a retailer.
Right.
They're a technology company. And oh, by the way,
That understands retail really well.
and they've learned,
Right.
right? They didn't start out knowing what to do.
Right.
They've tested and tested and tested and tested,
Right.
and it's fantastic to watch them drive the industry. I also like the way they are. We call it fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They are planting that at every turn. So these guys are, they're looking at it going, "Oh my gosh, how do I do that?
Right.
I can't do that with my mainframe applications."
Right. So the recommendation that you would give somebody that's really starting to look at doing something that's going to last more than 2, 3, 4, 5 years is to really look at the core level of how they handle data with the database. At that level is, you think, where they need to start?
That's the infrastructure start, but you also have to make money in the process, right? You cannot just do database transitions, right? Because that sets the foundation, but there's no money to be had there until you get to the next wave. So you've got to also do kind of joint projects that deliver business value. So you start with getting the infrastructure correct and maybe tackling master data, but you also maybe you improve your web access. And you can't. A lot of companies are outsourcing things today. They're solving the problem by buying a one-off, right? I'm going to give my e-com to somebody else,
right?
But that's not the solve, because that's not long-term. Sooner or later, you're going to want that back in, because you want, at the end of the day, you want a commerce strategy, not an e-commerce strategy. You want to
agree
completely connect your category manager and your vendor to the e-commerce strategy, because that's where the velocity comes from that the vendor's looking for. So you got to connect them. And if you disjoint it that way, if you have an e-commerce solution and a back office or bricks and mortar solution, you're never going to put them together.
Well, this is fascinating. Pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.